Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Star Wars has tons of excellent lessons that we can apply to everyday life. Like, always ask a girl you're about to make a move on if she's related to you, because incest babies go to the dark side. We also learn that when a person says that they have the high ground and you can see that they are standing on the high ground, they most likely are not bluffing about their tactical advantage. And more relevant to what I want to talk about today, usually people who exhibit risky behavior time and time again are prone to more risky behavior. So when you have individuals like Anakin Skywalker, who clearly is a reckless individual, it's probably not a good idea to trust them in high-risk activities like piloting a starship, for instance. And to prove that point, today we'll be looking at every instance Anakin Skywalker has been involved in a crash, whether that's a starship or a speeder. And to be fair, we're also going to analyze whether the crash is his fault or not. Because sometimes things are just out of your control, and it would be unfair to blame someone for something that is out of their control. Now, from a young age, Anakin showed that he had an affinity for piloting vehicles. At the age of 9, he was not only one of the youngest pod racers at the Boot Naive Classic, he was the only human with quick enough reflexes to be able to safely pilot a pod racer. Now, obviously, he used the Force to supplement his otherwise very human and inadequate reflexes. But the point is, from a young age, he subconsciously used his connection with the Force to become a great pilot. To the point where his self-confidence in his piloting skills became incredibly high, and that's probably what encouraged all the reckless behavior in the first place. Now, the first time we see Anakin have a full-on crash is during the Battle of Naboo. The 9-year-old accompanied Master Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi on a mission to free local loyalists fighting against a Trade Federation occupation. Probably would have been a good idea to leave the 9-year-old back on Coruscant before returning to an active battlefield that was full of combatants. But hey, the Jedi like to think outside the box, which is what makes them so unique and special.
Stay close to me, and you'll be safe.
Not great advice when your job involves a heavy amount of covert missions behind enemy lines and dueling evil space wizards. Anyway, as the blaster bolts begin flying, Anakin is told to hide inside a Naboo N1 starfighter, which is another terrible idea because autopilot gets triggered and Anakin finds himself flying in the middle of a gigantic space dogfight. When Anakin regains control of his ships, he decides to try some barrel rolls in order to avoid enemy fire, which leads him to flying straight into the hangar of a droid-controlled ship. He eventually runs out of real estate and crashes safely onto the floor of the ship. I think this crash isn't really Anakin's fault. I mean, he shouldn't be there in the first place, and he was forced down by enemy fire. Now, Anakin does have a chance to disengage from the enemy once he regains control of the ship and return back to Naboo. But again, I won't necessarily blame him for the entire situation. And the end result of him crashing into that ship is that he manages to destroy the droid ship from within, winning the entire battle. While I'm sure Anakin Skywalker crashes many times in between Episode 1 and Episode 2, we just don't have any proof of it in canon so far. But in Episode 2, Anakin is in pursuit of the assassin named Zam, who had just attempted to end his future Bay's life. Anakin pulls a series of reckless stunts and ends up jumping onto Zam's speeder, and then they both crash into the entertainment district in Coruscant. Luckily, no one really gets hurt that much. Is this crash Anakin's fault? Yes, this is Anakin's fault. Just a few months later, Anakin finds himself in the middle of a Separatist plot to capture Jabba's son, Rhoda. After he and Ahsoka secure the baby hut, they're on their way back to the planet of Tatooine when they're intercepted by Separatist magnet droids in Starfighters. The G9 rigger freighter called Twilight that Anakin was piloting was more of a civilian ship that the Jedi used to keep a low profile. It was hardly designed for combat. Anakin, however, decides instead of charging the rear shield first, he charges the laser cannon and front shields and goes on the offensive. The Twilight's lower stabilizer is immediately taken out and the ship crashes to the planet's surface. Again, I wouldn't put the blame on Anakin in this scenario. He was in a terrible ship in a terrible situation. Although I do have to add he should have probably powered up the rear deflectors before powering up the lasers and front deflectors. Probably also should have focused on evading the enemy instead of attacking them. Separatist leader General Grievous has been rampaging across the core regions of the galaxy in the Subjugator-class heavy cruiser Malevolence. This massive 4-kilometer long ship had a gigantic ion cannon which could disable an entire fleet in one shot. Anakin once again finds himself on the front lines leading a sortie of Y-Wings to take out the Malevolence. Although the Republic is successful in taking out the Malevolence's main weapon, they don't have enough firepower to destroy the ship. Meanwhile, the Separatists were rushing to fix the hyperdrive that had been damaged in Anakin's attack. As soon as they fixed the hyperdrive, they could escape and run away from the Republic. Anakin had no choice but to board the ship and figure out a way to stop the Separatists. He comes up with a brilliant plan and hardwires the nav computer to jump the ship straight into the nearby moon the next time the hyperdrive is activated. And that's exactly what happens. This is completely Anakin's fault, and it was a really brilliant move. With the war quickly spiraling out of control, Republic leaders sought to take out head Separatist leaders in order to end the conflict. During the skirmish of Vancor, Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi are in pursuit of Count Dooku in his signature Solar Sailor. The Jedi had commandeered a Shethapede-class transport shuttle, not necessarily the fastest or best armed ship, but Anakin does manage to hit Count Dooku's ship several times. But soon after, droid fighters were also able to disable their ship, and together the Sith Lord and the Jedi crash onto Vancor. Now, were I Anakin, I probably would have stopped pursuing Count Dooku once I saw that he had vulture droids covering him. But then again, Anakin is pretty reckless, and he likes following orders, at least in this situation. But this crash was out of his control. He was essentially forced down by enemy fighters. I also give him extra points for crashing right alongside Count Dooku. That's not really easy to do in a damaged ship, fly in from space, enter an atmosphere, and then land on a planet without killing yourself. Next, we go to the blockade of Ryloth. The Separatist Navy, led by the cunning Neimoidian technician Mark Took, arranges an impenetrable ring around the planet, cutting off Republic forces on the ground and starving the entire Twilight population. After attempting to breach the Separatist blockade several times, Anakin decides to take a Venator-class Star Destroyer with just him on board and surrenders to Mark Took for peace talks. Under the guise of surrender, Anakin does the unthinkable and kamikazes the Venator-class Star Destroyer right into the droid command ship. Not only is this crash completely his fault, he's also attacking an enemy force under the flag of truce. This is an incredibly stupid move for him and will put all future Republic forces in danger when they attempt to surrender. It's not surprising, of course, that the Jedi don't know anything about the rules of war. Obi-Wan Kenobi had done a similar thing just a year earlier on Christophsis. After a series of medical facilities are attacked across the galaxy, the Republic sends Anakin Skywalker along with Obi-Wan Kenobi and Ahsoka Tano to investigate a recent attack on the Felucia Medical Center. Upon reaching the system, they find themselves immediately under attack by vulture droids. This time, Anakin is piloting a T6 shuttle, a popular unarmed vessel used by Jedi ambassadors prior to the war. But even with Anakin's terrific piloting skills, it's no match for half a dozen vulture droids, and soon the T6 is disabled and crashes towards the surface of the planet. Luckily for the Jedi, the T6 has a very interesting escape pod system, which consists of giant opaque Zorb balls. I would say things were a bit out of Anakin's control in this scenario, and there was very little he could have done to prevent the crash. And to his credit, he was able to pilot the T6 shuttle well enough that it didn't burn up in the atmosphere. After the Battle of Malachor unearthed the Zillo Beast, Palpatine had the gigantic monster brought back to Coruscant for further studies. Unfortunately, the Beast somehow sensed the Chancellor was behind the whole ordeal and escaped and went after him. Palpatine attempts to escape along with Anakin, but before their shuttle can get enough altitude, the Zillo Beast gets hold of it. In this case, Anakin is just a passenger along for the ride. I'd go as far to say that had he been piloting, they might have even escaped. But in order to escape the grasp of the Zillo Beast, Anakin cuts the shuttle in half, sending it crashing down to the ground. But ultimately, this crash is definitely not his fault. More than a year after the Republic was successful at the Battle of Geonosis, the Geonosians came out of hiding and quickly overwhelmed the small Republic garrison still left on the planet. Anakin returns to Geonosis along with a huge Republic invasion fleet to retake the planet once again. On the way to the planet's surface aboard a fleet of LAAT gunships, Anakin's gunship takes heavy AA fire and they're shot down. Once again, Anakin was just the passenger, so not his fault. Now, for some reason, in the third year of the Clone Wars, Anakin doesn't really crash any ships. This could just be the writers acknowledging that Anakin was crashing a ship every other episode. But by 19 BBY, Anakin is back at it. In the middle of the Battle of Cato Neimoidia, Anakin and his Padawan Ahsoka Tano are flying a routine mission when Anakin's ship flies through a cloud of buzz droids. The buzz droids manage to damage Anakin's ship enough to cause an explosion that knocks Anakin out. R2-D2 manages to pull off a decent crash landing, and Ahsoka manages to get her master out of the cockpit before it flies off a cliff. Now, if you've dealt with buzz droids before, you know that they're basically unstoppable. This is definitely not Anakin's fault. It's also the 10th crash that Anakin has survived, so much for cats and their 9 lives, right? Finally, we get to the months right before the end of the Clone Wars. During the battle of Coruscant, Anakin and Obi-Wan Kenobi once again run into a cluster of buzz droids. Luckily, Anakin and R2-D2 are able to fight off the little buggers this time around. Anakin and Obi-Wan Kenobi must board Count Dooku and General Grievous' ship, where Palpatine is being kept hostage. The two don't really have time to slowly land inside the separate ship and commit to some pretty high-speed crash landings. Anakin does a much better job than Obi-Wan Kenobi in this case, but he definitely caused this crash on purpose, although the damage isn't that severe. After finally rescuing Palpatine, killing Count Dooku, and forcing General Grievous to retreat, Anakin finds himself piloting a massive Providence-class destroyer. Well, half of one. The part where the engines had completely been shorn off as the Providence began entering Coruscant's atmosphere. So without any real power and just a few maneuvering thrusters, Anakin manages to not only hold the ship together through re-entry, he also executes a successful crash landing. He also saves the Chancellor, himself, and his former master, and probably countless Coruscantes. This was definitely not his fault, and he should probably get a medal for pulling this off. So our end tally is that Anakin has been involved in at least 12 different crashes. Now obviously in Legends there are going to be more crashes, but so far this is just the canon list. Also, after Anakin loses a few limbs, he also crashes several times as Darth Vader. What is interesting is that the 12 crashes that he was involved in, only 4 of them are really his fault, and in most situations, despite purposely crashing his ship, it made tactical sense. Nonetheless, I would never get into a spaceship with this guy. Everyone just dies around him. And just because he survived 12 different crashes doesn't necessarily mean that you will. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.